A loner rancher was mocked for loving a native girl the next day. Her tribe praised him in song. The lasso fell into the mud. The wet sound of leather hitting dirt was swallowed by laughter. Reed Dalton was on his knees in the center of Devil's Fork Square, his hat tilted, the wooden box open in his calloused hands, exposing the ring not gold, but worked silver with turquoise, the way her people made them. "Look at the madman." Jake Morrison's voice cut through the air like a blade. "The loner from the dead ranch wants to marry a savage." More laughter. Spit flew, some hitting Reed's boots, others the hem of Island's dress. She remained motionless beside him, her black eyes fixed on some point beyond the crowd, beyond the town, beyond everything. Reed didn't move. Not when Tommy Garrett, 17, and all his father's venom, kicked the box from his hands. Not when old Henderson spat tobacco in his direction, muttering about blasphemy against nature. "We can leave now." The words came out low, only for her. Island finally lowered her eyes to him, and what Reed saw there wasn't fear of the town. It was something worse, shame, but not of him. "Get up, Dalton." Sheriff Watson approached, the star on his chest shining like an accusation. "Before they do something, I'll have to pretend I didn't see." Reed stood slowly. With the same calm, he picked up the ring from the mud, cleaned it on his already dirty shirt, and put it in his pocket. When Morrison tried to tear the feather necklace from Island's neck, Reed caught his wrist. "Touch her again, and you'll need more than the sheriff." Morrison backed away, but the damage was done. Some feathers had come loose, floating in the still air before falling into the mud. Island knelt and collected each feather, one by one. As she did, she hummed something quietly in that language that made white men cross themselves. When she finished, she looked at Reed. "Not here," she said in broken English. "Never here." And she left, not running, walking with the same dignity she'd arrived with 3 moons ago, wounded and hungry, at his ranch door. Reed stayed. Let them tear his shirt. Let them spit words worse than the spit. When the sun began to set and the crowd tired of the spectacle, he left too, but not to the ranch. Sarah Chen, daughter of the only Chinese merchant tolerated in Devil's Fork, was the first to see him the next morning. Reed was in the dry field beyond the town limits, digging. The sun had barely risen, and he was already drenched in sweat, the shovel rising and falling in steady rhythm. "Are you digging a well?" she asked, curious as always. Reed didn't answer, didn't stop. The shovel continued its work. Sarah ran back to town with the news. Within minutes, a small crowd had formed on the hill, watching. "A well in that dead land?" Henderson spat. "Easier to get water from stone." "Maybe it's not a well," suggested Widow Martins, pulling her shawl tight. "Maybe it's a grave," Morrison finished. The madman's finally gone completely mad. But Reed kept digging. When the sun was high, he had created not a hole, but a circle, perfect, the size of a wagon wheel. That's when Jimmy, Morrison's youngest, pointed to the horizon. "Pa." "What's that?" Figures appeared on the hills. Women, dozens of them, dressed in furs and fabrics the town only saw in nightmares. They descended in single file, and the sound reached them before they did her singing. It wasn't a war chant, as the men feared. It was something older, deeper, a song that spoke of earth and water, of blood and promise. Island came at the front, but not alone. An older woman, her face marked with sacred paint, walked beside her. "Mother of God." Watson murmured, his hand going instinctively to his revolver. "No." Reed's voice cut through the air. He had stopped digging, leaning on the shovel. "They come in peace." "How do you know?" Morrison shouted. Reed didn't answer, just watched as the women approached. When they reached the circle he had dug, they stopped. The older woman, clearly a matriarch, studied Reed for long moments. Then she spoke. Not in English, not in Spanish, but in that language older than both. Reed didn't understand the words, but understood the tone. Question, challenge, test. Island translated, her voice carrying something that wasn't there the day before. She asks why you dig a sacred circle in dead earth. Reed looked directly at the matriarch. Because all earth can be sacred if you know what to plant in it. When Island translated, something changed in the old woman's face. She approached the circle and studied the turned earth. Then she took a leather pouch from her belt and poured something there. Seeds, she says. Island hesitated, as if the words were too difficult. She says, you understand that the white man who lives alone understands what others don't. And what's that? The question came from Sarah Chen, who had approached closer than the others. The matriarch answered, and this time in broken Spanish, that love is not possess, is a plant. And wait, and trust that earth knows what to do. Reed took something from his pocket, the ring, but he didn't offer it to Island. He offered it to the matriarch. The silence was absolute. Even the wind stopped. The old woman took the ring and examined it. The silver, the turquoise. The work. Then she did something no one expected. She laughed. It was a rich, deep sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The other women began to laugh too, and soon the sound filled the air like birds taking flight. You did wrong, the matriarch said, still laughing. Is not man who asks, it is the woman who chooses, you. She pointed at Reed, you only. How you say, you only get ready. And wait. Reed blushed, the first real emotion the town had seen from him in years. Then I wait, he said simply. The matriarch returned the ring, but before Reed could put it away, she held his hand. With the other, she took Island's hand, joined them together. But wait, not mean how you say. Not mean passive, means prepare. You prepare earth, we prepare her. When both are ready, she released their hands. Then the right question comes. The women began singing again. This time, Reed recognized something in the rhythm. It was similar to the work songs he'd learned from Mexican vaqueros, songs about planting, about harvesting, about the eternal cycle of things. Morrison couldn't take it anymore. This is an outrage. Sheriff, do something. Watson looked at the women singing, at Reed standing calmly in the center of the circle, and at Island with something new shining in her eyes. Do what, Morrison? Arrest women for singing? Arrest Dalton for digging a hole in land that ain't even his. But this ain't natural. You know what is it natural? The voice came from an unexpected place. Sarah Chen, usually quiet, usually invisible. It isn't natural for a man to live alone for 5 years because the town decided he was cursed after his family died of fever. It isn't natural for a woman to be treated like an animal because she was born on the wrong side of an imaginary line. Shut up, Chinese. Morrison advanced but stopped when he realized the women had stopped singing. They were all looking at him, not with anger, with something worse, pity. The matriarch said something in her language. The women began moving, forming a circle round what Reed had dug. Each took something from their pouches, seeds, herbs, small objects that glinted in the sun. What are they doing? Widow Martins whispered. Ritual, Watson answered. Tense, some kind of blessing. Island corrected. It is a blessing for the new earth. For a new beginning. While the women worked, the matriarch approached Reed again. This time, she spoke low, only for him, but in clear English. You lost family to sickness. She lost family to a bullet. You both know the hole that death leaves, but know the difference between you and them. She gestured to the town. You not let hole become poison well. You look for how to plant something new in it. Reed swallowed hard. How do you know about my family? The old woman smiled. Earth talks. Wind carries. We listen. You helped her when she was a broken bird with clipped wings. Not because you wanted something. Because you know what it is to be a broken bird. No need to explain. Actions speak. But now, she looked at the townspeople watching from the hill. Now comes the hard part. Love in secret is easy. Love in daylight, with eyes watching, with mouths talking. That's a test. The singing rose again, and this time other voices joined. Not from the native women, but from unexpected sources. Sarah Chen, humming along. The widow Martins, tears on her cheeks, added her cracked voice. Even some of the Mexican workers who had arrived, drawn by the commotion. Morrison's face turned purple. Stop this. All of you. Stop this devil's work. But the singing continued, and as it did, something shifted in the air. The circle Reed had dug began to look less like a scar in the earth and more like possibility. What the earth knows. The singing lasted until the sun was directly overhead. Then, as suddenly as they'd begun, the women stopped. The matriarch raised her hand, and all eyes turned to her. "Now," she said in her broken English, loud enough for all to hear, "now we tell truth." She walked to the edge of the circle, her movements deliberate, ceremonial. From her pouch, she pulled out something that made several townspeople gasp. A piece of paper, official looking. "This," she held it up, "is a deed. Land deed. This land where the white man builds a town was given to us by the Spanish king. Before your America, before your laws." Sheriff Watson stepped forward. "Now wait a minute. You wait." Her voice carried authority that made even Watson pause. "We did not come to take. Land is, how do you say, poisoned now. Too much blood. Too much hate. We do not want back." She looked directly at Morrison. "You can keep your stolen ground." "Then why? But this man," she pointed to Reed, "he does something different. He tries to make new ground. Sacred ground. Not stolen. Made." She gestured to the circle. "So we come to witness. To bless. To say, this one, he understands the old way, new way. Both ways." Morrison pulled his gun. "I've heard enough of this heathen." The rifle shot echoed across the valley. Morrison's gun flew from his hand, spinning into the dirt. Everyone turned to see where the shot had come from. On the opposite hill stood a figure on horseback. As the rider approached, Reed's expression changed. Recognition, then something deeper. "That's far enough, Morrison." The rider was a woman, maybe 40, wearing men's clothes and a deputy's star. Federal Marshal Catherine Barnes. "Got word there might be trouble here. You called the Federals?" Morrison snarled at Watson. Watson looked as surprised as everyone. I did." The voice was quiet but clear. Island stepped forward. "I wrote a letter 2 weeks ago, when Reed told me what he planned." Reed turned to her, startled. "You knew, for the first time since yesterday's humiliation." Island smiled. Small, sad, but real. "You think you're the only one who prepares. You dig earth. I dig. Different ground." Marshal Barnes dismounted, her movements efficient and professional. "Got your letter, miss. Also got some interesting information about Mr. Morrison here. Seems those native girls who've gone missing from the reservation over the past 2 years. Trail leads back to a certain ranch." Morrison went white. "You can't prove, can't I?" Barnes pulled out another paper. "Testimony from one of your own ranch hands. It seems is. Conscience finally got the better of him. That, plus what I've observed here today." She looked at the circle, at the native women, and at Reed and Island. Attempted assault. Disturbing a peaceful gathering. Threatening federal witnesses. Witnesses to what? Henderson demanded. "To history, Mr. Henderson. To change." Barnes walked to the circle's edge. "You see, the government's got a new policy coming. Recognition of certain land rights, marriage rights. Things that should have been recognized long ago." She looked at Reed. "Your union, should you choose to pursue it, will be legal, protected by federal law." The silence was deafening. Then the matriarch laughed again. "See? Earth knows. Plant seed of justice, grow tree of law." She looked at Morrison, who was being cuffed by Barnes. "You try to poison ground with hate, but hate makes weak roots. Love and justice, those roots go deep. Break stone, wait." Reed's voice stopped everyone. He walked to where Morrison knelt in the dirt, knelt down to meet his eyes. "Your son, Tommy, he doesn't have to become you. Don't you dare. I'm offering him work, real work, on my ranch, away from your poison." Reed stood and addressed the crowd. "Any of your kids who want to learn differently, my door's open. You think you're better than us?" Henderson spat. "No, just trying to be better than I was yesterday." The matriarch made a sound of approval. She turned to Island and spoke in their language. Island's eyes widened, then filled with tears. "What did she say?" Reed asked. "She says," Island's voice broke, "she says my mother would be proud. That I found a man who understands that strength is not in taking, is in opening, in making space for growth." The old woman approached them both. From her neck, she removed a necklace. Not feathers, but small carved figures, animals, plants, symbols Reed didn't recognize. This was my grandmother's, her grandmother's before. Goes to the woman who bridges worlds. She placed it around Island's neck. "You are a bridge now, both of you. Hard path. Many will try to burn bridges, but," She smiled. But bridges built with love, those hardest to burn. The women began gathering their things. The ritual was complete. As they prepared to leave, several townspeople called out, "Wait." It was Sarah Chen. The blessing. Does it? Could it work for others? The matriarch studied her. This young Chinese woman who had spoken truth when others held silence. Earth doesn't care where seed comes from, only that it's planted with good intention. She looked back at the circle. This ground is blessed now. Any who plant here with an open heart, Earth will listen. As the native women filed back toward the hills, Aileen remained. She stood beside Reed, not touching, but close enough that their shadows merged in the afternoon sun. "You're not going with them?" Reed asked. "My place is between," she said. "Like you. Neither here nor there. But maybe that's where new things grow, in the between spaces." Marshall Barnes mounted her horse, which Morrison secured for transport. "I'll be back in a month. For the wedding, if you're still of a mind." "Wedding?" Reed looked confused. Aileen smiled, fuller this time. "You asked wrong yesterday, but asking was still brave. Now I ask, right?" She took the ring from his pocket and held it up to catch the light. "Reed Dalton, will you plant new life with me? Will you build a bridge with me?" Reed's answer was to take her hand, not to possess, just to hold. The crowd began dispersing, some muttering, some thoughtful, some changed. Sarah Chen was the last to leave, but not before approaching them. "My father has books about farming, different kind of farming, from old country. Maybe they help with your planting." As the sun began its descent, Reed and Aileen stood alone in the circle. The seeds the women had planted were invisible now, buried in earth that had been dead but was now ready for life. "What do we do now?" Reed asked. "Now." Aileen knelt and placed her palm on the blessed ground. "Now we water with patience, tend with hope, and wait for the first green shoots. And them." Reed nodded toward the town. "Some will come to understand, others." She shrugged. "Others will be like stone, but even stone breaks given time. Given roots that refuse to stop growing." That night, for the first time in 5 years, smoke rose from the chimney of the Dalton Ranch. Not the smoke of solitude, but of home being made, of food being shared, of life returning to places that had known too much death. And in the morning, when the townspeople woke, they found something had changed in the night. The circle Reed had dug was no longer empty. In its center stood a post, not wood, but stone, and carved into it, in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and the tongue of Aileen's people, were words, "Here begins new ground. All who plant in peace are welcome." The first green shoots 3 weeks passed. The circle in the dead field had become something else entirely. Sarah Chen was there at dawn, planting herbs her father had hoarded from China. The widow Martins came at midday with tomato seedlings. Even some of the Mexican vaqueros arrived at dusk with corn blessed by their own grandmothers. Reed watched from the hill as Aileen taught them the planting songs. Her voice carried on the wind, no longer hidden, no longer ashamed. "You've started something," Marshall Barnes observed, having arrived early for the wedding. She'd set up a temporary office in town, investigating Morrison's crimes and others that had surfaced like pus from a lanced wound. "Not me," Reed said. "The earth started it. We just listened." Barnes studied him. This man who'd lost his wife and infant daughter to scarlet fever 5 years back, who'd retreated to his ranch like a wounded animal, accepting the town's verdict that he was cursed, who'd found Aileen half dead by the creek and nursed her back without questions, without demands. The town's talking about the wedding, some saying they won't recognize it. They don't have to. Reed's voice was calm. The earth recognizes it. The law recognizes it. The rest is just noise. A rider approached fast. Tommy Garrett, Morrison's friend's son. But something was different. Gone was the swagger, the sneer. The boy, almost man, looked scared. "Mr. Dalton, you gotta come quick. It's Jeremy Morrison. He's at your ranch with a gun. Says he's gonna burn it down if you don't face him." Reed sighed. He'd known this was coming. Morrison's son, trying to prove himself while his father awaited trial. "How many with him?" Barnes asked, already checking her rifle. "None. That's the thing. He's alone." And Tommy swallowed. And he's crying, Marshall. Just standing there with a torch in one hand and a gun in the other, crying like a baby. They rode hard, but when they arrived, the scene wasn't what they expected. Jeremy Morrison, 18, and full of his father's rage, stood in front of the ranch house, but between him and the building stood Eileen. She wasn't pleading, wasn't threatening, she was singing. The same song from the ceremony, but softer, a lullaby version. Jeremy's gun shook in his hand. Stop it. Stop that devil music. Is not devil music, Eileen said calmly. Is mother music. Song for lost children. You are lost child, yes? I'm not a child, no. But you are lost. She took a step closer. Jeremy raised the gun, but his hand trembled too much to aim. Your father taught you hate. But hate is heavy burden for young shoulders. Reed dismounted slowly, hands visible. Jeremy, put the gun down. You ruined him. The boy's voice cracked. He was strong, respected. Then you and your witch woman. Your father ruined himself, Barnes interrupted. What I found on his ranch, the graves, those girls. Jeremy's face crumbled. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what they. The torch fell from his hand, guttering out in the dirt. I heard them sometimes, crying. But he said it was coyotes. Said I was soft for wondering. Eileen moved closer. Jeremy didn't resist when she gently took the gun, passing it to Barnes. Then, to everyone's surprise, she embraced him. This boy who'd come to burn her home, held him while he sobbed. Is okay, she murmured. Sins of father, not always sins of son. You choose now. Be stone like him, or be earth, ready for new growth. When Jeremy finally pulled away, his face was streaked with tears and dirt. He looked at Reed. I don't know how to be anything else. Neither did I, Reed said. 5 years ago, I lost everything. Town said I was cursed. I believed them. Became the curse they expected. He looked at Eileen. Then she showed up, broken as me. But she didn't see the curse. She saw possibility. I don't have anywhere to go. They won't want me in town. Not after. The offer stands, Reed said. Work for room and board. Learn different ways. Jeremy looked between them. This man his father had taught him to hate. This woman he'd been told was savage. Both offering what his own blood never had. Grace, okay. It came out small and defeated. But also, maybe, relieved. That evening, as they prepared for tomorrow's wedding, Reed found Eileen standing in the circle they'd made. It was green now. Impossibly. Beautifully green. Shoots pushing through earth that hadn't seen life in decades. Regrets, he asked. She considered. My people say regret is like trying to change the direction of a river that's already reached the sea. Pointless, but she touched one of the new plants. But sometimes I think of my mother, my sisters, wonder if they would understand. The matriarch understood. She's not my mother. Pain flickered across her face. My mother died believing I was cursed for loving a traitor's son. Died thinking I brought shame. Then we prove her wrong, Reed said. Not by words, by living. By showing that love between different worlds doesn't curse, it creates. Eileen turned to him. In the dying light, her face was both ancient and young. You know they'll come. Not today. Not tomorrow. But someday, men like Morrison, but smarter, with papers, with laws. They'll try to take what we build. Maybe. But look, Reed gestured to the circle, where Sarah Chen was teaching the widow Martins to tend Chinese herbs, where Tommy Garrett was learning planting songs from a Mexican grandmother, where Jeremy Morrison knelt in the dirt, hands learning to create instead of destroy. It's not just us anymore. It's spreading, like roots, underground. Try to pull up one plant, and 10 more grow. That night, Eileen performed a ritual her grandmother had taught her, for dreams, for visions, for glimpses of what might come. She saw fire. She saw floods. She saw men in suits drawing lines on maps, cutting apart what was meant to be whole. But she also saw children, many children, some with her eyes, some with reeds. Some belonged to neither but call them family anyway. She saw the circle grow beyond recognition, not just a garden but a town. A different kind of town. She saw an old woman herself teaching songs to grandchildren of all colors. And beside her, an old man with Reed's patient eyes, still planting, still believing Earth knows better than men what should grow. When she woke, Reed was watching her. "What did you see?" "Tomorrow," she said. "Many tomorrows, hard ones, beautiful ones, worth it." She smiled. "My people say nothing worth doing is easy. Easy paths lead to shallow roots. We're planting deep." The wedding day dawned clear. The ceremony would be at noon, in the circle, performed by Marshall Barnes, who had the authority, and blessed by the matriarch, who had returned with a smaller group. But first, there was work to do. Reed and Jeremy repaired the fence. Eileen and Sarah Chen prepared food. The widow Martins and her daughters decorated with wildflowers. Even some townspeople who'd jeered 3 weeks ago arrived with gifts. Not many, but some. "It's starting," Barnes observed, watching the preparations. "Change, slow, painful, but real." "All growth is painful," the matriarch said, having appeared silently beside her. "Birth, healing, learning, all require pain. The question is, pain with purpose or pain from holding on to what's already dead?" At noon, they gathered. Not the whole town, but enough to witness, enough to remember. Reed wore his best shirt, which wasn't much, but clean. Eileen wore a dress that was both cultures woven together, made by her own hands during the 3 weeks of waiting. The ceremony was simple. Barnes, read the legal words. The matriarch spoke the old words. And then Eileen and Reed spoke their own words. "I don't promise easy," Reed said. "I promise to tend what we plant, to water in drought, to shelter in a storm, to trust the earth even when I can't see what's growing. I don't promise to be only one thing," Eileen responded. "I am river between the banks, but I promise to flow through, to carry you when you need carrying, to reflect sky honestly, even when the sky is dark." They exchanged rings, not just the silver and turquoise, but also a simple band Reed had forged himself from iron. 2 metals, 2 traditions, 1 circle. As they kissed, a sound rose from the hills, singing, but not just the native women. Other voices had joined, travelers, drifters, people who'd heard about the circle where different seeds could grow together. "Listen," the matriarch said. "Future sings." Morrison, watching from his cell in the federal prison 100 miles away, heard nothing. But that night, he dreamed of roots, growing, spreading, cracking the stone walls he'd built around his heart. He woke screaming, but couldn't say why. Back in Devil's Fork, the celebration lasted until stars filled the sky. Not a large party, not grand, but real. Stories shared. Food was passed from hand to hand. Children, Sarah Chen's little brothers, the widow's daughters, and others played together while adults watched in wonder and worry. "What have we done?" someone asked. "What needed doing?" someone answered. Late that night, in the house that was no longer empty, Reed and Eileen lay listening to the night sounds. Coyotes. Wind. The whisper of new growth in the circle. "No going back now," Reed said. "Would you want to?" He thought of 5 years alone, of the town's whispers about curses, of the weight of grief carried in isolation. Then I thought of these past weeks, the singing, the planting, the gradual understanding that broken doesn't mean worthless. "No," he said. "Forward is the only direction that makes sense, even if forward is hard, especially then." Outside, Jeremy Morrison kept watch. He'd volunteered, needing to feel useful, to earn the grace given. As he walked the perimeter, he practiced the planting songs Eileen had taught him. His voice was rough, uncertain, but it was a beginning. And in the circle, invisible in darkness but working still, roots spread. Seeds cracked. Life pushed against the weight of earth, reaching for sky it couldn't yet see but somehow knew was there. The miracle wasn't the growth. The miracle was the patience, the trust, the willingness to plant in ground everyone said was dead. But earth knows better than men what it can hold. Earth always knows. Harvest of stones 10 years later. The circle was unrecognizable now. What had begun as a single ring had spread in organic spirals, creating a model of gardens that fed half the county. At its heart stood the stone marker, weathered but still readable in 3 languages. Reed knelt in the cornrows, his daughter beside him, Esperanza. They'd named her Hope. She was 7, with her mother's eyes and his steady hands. "Why do we thank the earth, Papa?" She asked, helping him check the soil. Because the earth remembers everything, he said. Every seed, every song, every tear, and if we're grateful, it shares those memories with us through what grows. Across the gardens, Island taught a group of women Native, Mexican, Chinese, even some white the preservation songs, how to dry herbs so they held their medicine, how to save seeds so they carried their stories forward. Jeremy Morrison, now 28 and Reed's foreman, worked alongside Tommy Garrett. They'd become unlikely brothers, bonded by the choice to grow beyond their father's hatred. Riders coming, Tommy called out, shading his eyes. Reed stood, brushing dirt from his knees. 3 men in federal uniforms, official looking. His hand went instinctively to where a gun might have been once. Easy, Island said. Appearing beside him, she carried their son, 2-year-old Miguel, named for Reed's grandfather. Remember what the earth teaches. Deep roots don't fear storms. Marshall Barnes, older now, with silver threading her hair, rode at the front. Her face was grim. Reed, Island, we need to talk. They gathered in what they called the council circle, a ring of stones, at the garden's heart where decisions were made collectively. The federal agents looked uncomfortable, out of place among the growing things. New laws passed, Barnes said without preamble. The Allotment Act, governments breaking up tribal lands, forcing individual ownership. She looked at Island. They want to make your people choose, become citizens and lose tribal rights, or stay Indian and lose land rights. The silence was heavy as earth before rain. And us, Reed asked. The gardens, that's why I'm here. Officially, to inform you that mixed marriages might be challenged, that communal gardens on what's technically private property could be seized. Barnes paused. Unofficially, to warn you. They're coming, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Men who see what you've built and want to own it, or destroy it. Why? Esperanza's voice was small but clear. Why break what grows good? One of the younger agents, barely older than Jeremy, shifted uncomfortably. Because what grows here challenges what grows there, he said, nodding toward town. Makes people question, makes them want different. Agent Collins, his superior, snapped. It's true. Sir, my own sister came here last month, learned things. Now she questions why she can't own land in her own name. Why her husband can beat her legally. Why? Enough. But the damage was done. Or perhaps the seeds were planted. Collins looked at the gardens with something like hunger. Not for ownership, but for understanding. So what do we do? Jeremy asked. Once, he would have reached for violence. Now he reached for alternatives. We adapt, Island said. Like plants in drought. Send roots deeper. Spread seeds wider. She looked at Barnes. This law, it tries to make us choose between 2 things, yes? But what if we choose the third thing? What third thing? Island smiled. It was the smile that had survived boarding schools meant to kill the Indian in her. Survived loss and pain and attempts to erase her. We incorporate, what? Make the gardens a trust, legal entity. Not owned by one person or one tribe, owned by all who work it. She'd been learning these 10 years. Not just plants, but papers. Laws, the weapons of the new world. Your American law loves corporations, yes? Then we become a corporation, but a different kind. Barnes leaned back, something like admiration flickering in her eyes. That might actually work, but you'd need lawyers. Money. Support from people who matter. Then we get them, Reed said simply. We've planted stranger seeds in harder ground. That night, they called a gathering. Not just the gardeners, but everyone the gardens had touched. The widow Martins, whose daughters now ran a restaurant in town featuring food from the gardens. Sarah Chen, who'd become a teacher, bringing children to learn. Even some from Devil's Fork who'd mocked them 10 years ago, but now bought their produce. Reed stood before them, Island beside him, their children playing at their feet with others. Black hair, blonde hair, every shade between. You all know why we're here, he began. What we've built is threatened, not by drought or disease, but by fear. Fear of what happens when different seeds grow together. Fear of what blooms when we forget to hate. They want us to choose, Island continued. Be this or that, own or be owned. But Earth doesn't recognize such choices. Earth recognizes only what feeds life and what feeds death. An old man in the back, Henderson, who'd spat at Reed's proposal 10 years ago, stood slowly. "I was wrong," he said, voice cracking. "Was wrong about a lot of things. This place," he gestured around, "this place fed my family when drought killed everything else. Fed my soul too, though I was too proud to admit it." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a leather pouch, "My grandfather's gold, hidden for decades. It's yours, for lawyers, for whatever is needed." Others stood. Offerings came forward. Not just money, but skills, connections. The Chinese merchant's cousin was a lawyer in San Francisco. The Mexican families had relations who knew territorial law. Even Agent Collins, risking everything, offered to provide information about government plans. "Why?" his superior demanded. "Why betray?" "Your duty, because my duty is to justice," Collins said. "And there's more justice in this garden than in all the federal buildings I've seen." The matriarch, ancient now but still strong, raised her hand for silence. "I have lived long enough to see many endings, trails of tears, broken treaties, children stolen." Her voice carried despite, its frailty. "But I also see beginnings. This place is beginning, not just garden, not just marriage of different worlds. It is a map for the future." She looked at Reed and Island. "You planted in dead ground and made life. Now plant in dead law and make justice." The work began immediately. Letters written, lawyers were consulted, papers filed, but also seeds saved, knowledge shared, networks built. If the gardens fell, 100 smaller gardens would rise. If the trust failed, the trust between people would endure. Morrison heard about it in prison. He was dying, tumors eating him from inside. The guard said he raved about roots in his final days, about things growing in the dark, about his son who'd chosen different soil. His last words were, "Tell Jeremy. Tell him the stones were wrong. Only stones. Should have been earth." Jeremy wept when he heard, not for the father Morrison had been, but for the father he might have been in different ground. The first challenge came 6 months later. Federal inspectors, land surveyors, men with papers claiming prior rights, mineral rights, water rights, every kind of right except the right of those who'd made the land bloom. But they were ready. The lawyer from San Francisco, brilliant daughter of immigrants, had done her work. The trust was ironclad. The gardens were protected by the very laws meant to destroy them. "This is irregular," the lead inspector said, reviewing the papers. "Highly irregular. So is love between worlds." Island responded, "Yet here we are." The inspector, a thin man who looked like he'd never touched earth, studied her. Then they looked at the gardens, looked at the children playing, at the people of all colors working side by side. "I'll need to make a report," he said finally. "Report truth," Reed suggested. "That usually surprises them most." The inspector did something unexpected then. He laughed, short, sharp, like a cough. "You know what? I think I will." He tucked his papers away. "Gentlemen, we're done here. This land is adequately documented." After they left, Collins, who'd resigned his position to work full-time in the gardens, asked, "What changed his mind?" The widow Martins, wise with years, smiled. "Same thing that changes all minds eventually." He saw something growing that he'd been told couldn't grow. Hard to deny what's right in front of your eyes, but the challenges kept coming. Some legal, some violent. Night riders who tried to burn the crops, lawyers who found loopholes, politicians who preached about racial purity and the danger of mixing. Each time, the gardens adapted, grew stronger, spread wider. 5 years into the legal battles, something shifted. The state sent a new superintendent of Indian Affairs, a woman itself revolutionary. She arrived expecting to find chaos, miscegenation, and a breakdown of proper order. Instead, she found Esperanza teaching both traditional weaving and modern agriculture to a mixed class of children. She found Miguel playing violin, a European instrument, native melodies, while his teacher, a former slave from the South, accompanied on piano. She found Reed and Island, grayed now but unbowed, working alongside people who'd once tried to destroy them. "This shouldn't work," she said to Barnes, who'd retired to Devil's Fork to be near what she called the real law in action. Lots of things shouldn't work, Barnes replied. Bees shouldn't fly. Seeds shouldn't grow in dead ground. People shouldn't forgive those who tried to kill them. Yet here we are. The superintendent stayed a week, watched, listened, learned. When she left, her report was not what her superiors expected. Recommend immediate expansion of the Devil's Fork model, she wrote. What grows there is not degradation, but elevation. Not mixing of races, but mixing of wisdom. The future, gentlemen, whether we like it or not. The report was buried. The superintendent was transferred. But copies had been made, shared. Seeds of ideas planted in minds ready for different growth. 25 years after the rope fell in the mud, Reed stood where it had fallen, Island beside him. The town square of Devil's Fork had changed. The platform where he'd been mocked was now a stage where all languages were spoken. The mud where he'd knelt was now a garden, tended by the town's children as part of their schooling. Did you imagine this? Mayor Chen Sarah, elected just that year, asked them. No, Reed admitted. I just imagined surviving the next day. Then the next. Then one day I looked up and saw this. The earth imagined it, Island added. We just listened. Their children were grown now. Esperanza had become a lawyer, fighting for indigenous rights and mixed families across the territory. Miguel was a composer, creating symphonies that wove all the musical traditions of the gardens together. Others had come to fostered, adopted, or simply arrived and stayed. The house that had stood empty for 5 years now overflowed with life. Jeremy Morrison had married one of the widow Martin's daughters. Their children played in the same dirt their grandfathers had spat in. Tommy Garrett had gone east to study agriculture, returning with knowledge that he wed to traditional practices. Agent Collins had become the garden's chronicler, documenting not just what grew but how it grew. Sometimes I dream about that day, Reed said quietly. The laughter, the humiliation, the fear in your eyes, not fear of them, Island corrected. As she had years ago, fear that I'd been wrong, that maybe the voices were right, that we were too different, that some grounds can't be joined. And now, she smiled, lines mapping years of sun and struggle on her face. Now I know the voices were right. We are different. Some grounds can't be joined. She took his hand. They must grow together, side by side, roots entangled but each plant itself. That evening, as they'd done for 25 years, they gathered in the circle for sunset songs. Hundreds now where once there'd been two. Voices and languages that had tried to silence each other are now rising together. Morrison had been wrong about the grave. Reed hadn't been digging his own burial place that day. He'd been planting resurrection. Not just his own, but everyone's who was brave enough to kneel in the mud and plant something new. The matriarch had died 5 winters ago, but her words lived, Earth knows. And the Earth had known, had always known, that love was stronger than law, that roots were mightier than rifles, that what grows together grows strongest. As the stars emerged, someone began singing the old song, the one that had started it all, about earth and water, blood and promise. Others joined, harmonies weaving like roots beneath soil. In the federal capital, men in marble halls made plans to finally, decisively end the Devil's Fork experiment. But they were already too late. The seeds had spread. In 100 towns, in 1,000 gardens, people were discovering what Reed and Island had learned. You can't kill what's rooted in truth. You can only try to keep it from growing. And Earth patient, eternal, wise Earth always waits longer than those who would deny it. Look, Esperanza pointed to the edge of the gardens where new ground was being broken. They're expanding again. Let them come, Reed said, meaning not just the gardeners, but the forces that would try to stop them. We've got good ground, deep roots. And time. He looked at Island. We've got time. She nodded, understanding. They were old now, would not see the full harvest, but that had never been the point. The point was to plant. To tend. To trust, to listen to what the earth had always known. Love finds a way to grow, even in dead ground, especially in dead ground, because dead ground has nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The harvest eternal. 100 years after the rope fell in the mud, a young woman stood in the museum, that had once been Devil's Fork's town square. Her name was Hope Dalton Clearwater, and she carried in her veins the blood of Ireland and the Lakota Nation, of Mexico and China, of Africa and a dozen other streams that had converged in this place. She was a historian come to study the famous Devil's Fork phenomenon, how a moment of humiliation had become a movement of humanization. The museum held artifacts, the rope that had fallen. The stone marker was moved here when the gardens had become a national monument. Photos of Reed and Eileen, aged but unbowed, surrounded by grandchildren of all colors. But what drew Hope was a journal, Eileen's, written in her last years. She opened it to a page marked by countless previous readers. They asked me for wisdom, as if years bring answers instead of better questions. So I tell them only this: we did not set out to change the world. We set out to plant a garden. The world changed itself, trying to stop us. Reed is gone now, planted in the earth he loved. I will join him soon. But the gardens grow without us. As they should. We were never the point. The point was the planting, the tending, the patient's belief that what shouldn't grow together might be exactly what needs to. To those who come after, remember that every empire that tried to divide us has fallen, but the gardens remain. Draw your own conclusions about what endures. The earth knows. The earth has always known. We just had to learn to listen. Plant well, plant brave, plant together. The harvest is eternal for those who trust the ground. Hope closed the journal gently. Outside, she could hear children playing in the gardens, now a vast network covering what had once been empty prairie. Their voices rose in a song she recognized, though the words had evolved through generations. She walked out, past the museum displays, past the photos of federal agents who'd become gardeners, of enemies who'd become family, of a nation slowly learning what Devil's Fork had discovered in pain and joy, that the rope, falling in the mud, had not been an ending. It had been a beginning, and the harvest continued still. In the gardens, an old man taught a young girl to plant corn. Her skin was pale, his dark, but their hands moved with the same careful rhythm. "Why do we thank the earth, grandfather?" she asked. "Because the earth remembers everything," he said, words echoing across a century. "Every seed, every song, every tear. And if we're grateful, it shares those memories with us through what grows." The girl nodded solemnly and placed the seed in the ground. Another beginning, another act of faith. Above them, clouds gathered, promising rain. The earth waited, patient as always, ready to prove once again what it had always known. Love is the strongest root, and what grows from love feeds the world, even when the world thinks it would rather starve, especially then. From the Journal of Hope Dalton Clearwater, they called him the Lone Rancher. They mocked him for loving a native girl. But the next day, when her tribe came not for war, but for witness, when they sang not curses but blessings, when they planted not division, but unity, that next day, the world tilted on its axis. Just a little, just enough. And in that tilting, new ground was revealed. Ground where impossible things could grow. We are all children of that tilting. Children of the rope that fell. Children of the song that rose. Children of the earth that knows. May we plant as bravely as they did. May we tend as faithfully. May we trust as deeply. The harvest is ours to continue. The earth is waiting. Listen. The woman he saved ended up saving not just him, but all of us, because she taught him to plant, and he taught her she was worth planting for. And together, they taught a nation that the ground we think is dead might just be waiting for the right seeds, the right songs, the right courage to kneel in the mud and believe in tomorrow's harvest.